Welcome to the Farms.com Daily Market Commentary for March 1st, 2012. This is Michelle Limerant, Commodity Research Analyst for Farms.com Risk Management. Happy first day of March, everyone. Hopefully spring comes soon. Today we are reviewing the latest USDA weekly U.S. grain export numbers reported on March 1st for the week ending February 23rd. U.S. soybean net export sales were reported at 549,100 metric tons for old crop and 427,300 metric tons for new crop, above expectations of 400 to 800,000 metric tons. Old crop net sales were down significantly from last week and down 7.5% from the prior 4-week average. U.S. soybean export sales to date are now down 24.6% versus the same period last year, as you can see indicated in the chart in front. Weekly export sales were well above the pace necessary to meet the USDA's current 11-12 projection of 1,325 million bushel. Calculations are based on both accumulated exports to date as well as outstanding sales. Weekly export sales for the 11-12 marketing year will now need to average 265,267 metric tons per week over the next 28 weeks, which is an improvement over the pace required in previous weeks. Major buyers of soybeans this period included China and Mexico. 859 million bushels of soybeans have now been shipped so far this year, compared to 1,140 million bushels by this time last year. U.S. wheat net export sales for the week were reported at 414,100 metric tons for the 11-12 marketing year and 95,000 metric tons for the 12-13 marketing year, within expectations of 500 to 700,000 metric tons. 11-12 net sales were down significantly from both last week and the prior 4-week average. U.S. wheat export sales to date are now down 18% versus the same period last year, as you can see indicated in the teal line in the chart in front. Weekly export sales for the 11-12 marketing year were well within the pace necessary to meet the current USDA projection of 975 million bushel. Weekly exports will now need to average 206,078 metric tons per week over the next 16 weeks, which is lower than the pace required in previous weeks. Major buyers of wheat this period included South Korea and Thailand. 684 million bushels of wheat have been shipped so far this year, compared to 834 million by this time last year. U.S. corn export sales for the week were reported at 689,959 metric tons for old crop and 23,000 metric tons for new crop, within expectations of 600 to 850,000 metric tons. Net sales for the 11-12 marketing year were down 17.9% from last week and down 20.1% from the prior 4-week average. U.S. corn export sales to date are now down 1% compared to the same period last year. Weekly export sales for the 11-12 marketing year were well above the pace necessary to meet the current USDA projection of 1,700 million bushel. Weekly sales will now need to average 451,385 metric tons per week for the next 29 weeks, which is an improvement in the pace required. Major buyers of 11-12 corn included Japan, Mexico, and China. 797 million bushels of corn so far have been shipped this year, compared to 805 million bushels by this time last year. So bottom line, even though weekly export sales were lower across the board compared to recent weeks, they were still within or above expectations. The bulk of U.S. corn sales continued to go to Mexico and Japan, with China as the third largest buyer this week. If China continues to buy a significant amount of U.S. corn, it could mean the difference between China corn sitting in a trading range or breaking out to the upside. The weather in the U.S. is not currently a factor in markets, but it will soon start to be discussed more and more in the coming weeks as planting in the bulk of the nation begins to near. Analysts continue to lower the 11-12 South American soybean production estimate, adding to the bullishness seen in the soybean market in recent weeks. Bernanke's semi-annual monetary policy speech that continues today could cause more volatility in the markets, as his comments yesterday sparked a sharp change in gold, silver, the US dollar, and crude oil values yesterday. In other news, U.S. weekly jobless claims fell by 2,000 to 351,000, in line with expectations. Continuing weekly jobless claims were reported at 3.4 million. According to Russia's state forecaster, 92 to 94% of the country's winter grain crop is in good to satisfactory winter condition, while 6 to 8% is in poor condition versus the 5-year average of 8.9. China announced that it will partially lift the ban on Canadian canola in the second half of this year. The ban has now been in place since 2009 due to fungal disease concerns. This is more good news for canola futures, which are already breaking out on the charts due to current strong export demand and tight ending stock levels. The USDA ag attaché in Brazil lowered his estimate for Brazil's 11-12 soybean production to 70 million metric tons, 2 million metric tons lower than the current USDA WASDE estimate, and 5.3 million metric tons lower than last year's crop of 75.3. The attaché also lowered its 11-12 Brazilian soybean export estimate to 33 million metric tons versus the February WASDE estimate of 37.8 and last year at 33.8. The AIA reported weekly ethanol production at 896,000 barrels per day, down 23,000 barrels per day from the previous week. This was the lowest weekly production since last October. Ethanol stocks were pegged at 22 million barrels, up 500,000 barrels from last week. The quality of Western Canada's 2011 pulse crop was rated as good overall by the Canadian Grain Commission, as in 2011 the weather was favorable across most pulse growing areas, which contributed to higher quality. The production of 2011 chickpeas was estimated at 91,000 metric tons, down 29% from last year, and 39% lower than the 10-year average of 148,000 metric tons. The decrease in production was attributed to smaller harvested area. That's all for today. Have a nice day.